What would you do if you learned that the human mind is capable of phenomena that overturn everything we know about nature and science? How would you react upon discovering that? In the very heart of the Russian Empire, among the narrow lanes of Moscow, something occurred so inexplicable that the best minds of the time preferred to remain silent in official scientific journals. In the summer of 1867, when Moscow was suffering from unprecedented heat, an event took place on the outskirts of the city in the district of Kamovniki, an event that was later thoroughly documented but never scientifically explained. An 8-year-old boy, Ivan Petrov, the son of a minor official of the Ministry of State Domains, Nikolai Petrov, and his wife Anna, became the center of anomalous phenomena that lasted exactly 42 days and ended as suddenly and inexplicably as they had begun. According to the archival records of the Moscow Provincial Hospital, on June 23, 1867, Ivan was admitted to the hospital with symptoms that were at first taken for ordinary fever. Dr. Mikhail Andreevich, chief physician of the children's ward, wrote in the case history, "A boy 8 years of age, thin build, was admitted with a high temperature of 39.6 degrees Celsius, rapid heartbeat, and periodic spasms of the limbs." The parents state that the symptoms appeared suddenly, without any previous signs of illness. Preliminary diagnosis: fever of unknown origin. The next day, the boy's condition changed so much that Dr. had to call in colleagues for consultation. By then, Ivan's temperature had normalized, but new, very alarming symptoms appeared. Nurse Elizaveta Timofeevna Krasnova left the following entry in the observation log. At 4 a.m., patient Petrov Ivan woke up and began speaking in a language that none of the staff could identify. The speech resembled neither any of the known European languages, nor any from the East. The boy was fully conscious, recognized his parents, but did not respond when addressed in Russian. At 5:30, the speech ceased, and the patient fell into a deep sleep. The medical council assembled on June 25th did not come to any single conclusion. Dr. Pavel Ivanovich, a neurologist from St. Petersburg, who happened to be in Moscow for a medical conference, suggested it was a rare form of hysteria. Dr. Sokolov leaned toward a diagnosis of encephalitis of unclear etiology. The third participant, Dr. Vasily Nikolaevich Kersinsun, put forward the idea that the boy had been poisoned by some unknown substances. By the end of the first week of the boy's stay in the hospital, phenomena began to occur around Ivan Petrov, but could not be explained rationally. The first unexplainable phenomenon was a change in the temperature in the room where the boy was. Despite the July heat, the thermometer on the wall showed only 8 degrees Celsius, while in the adjacent rooms the instruments recorded normal summer temperatures of 26-28 graus Celsius. Dr. Sokolov ordered the boy transferred to another ward, but the anomalous cold followed the patient. The new case record read, "Unexplainable lowering of air temperature is observed in a radius of about 2 meters around the patient. The phenomenon persists when the patient is moved. The mechanism of this phenomenon cannot be explained in terms of known physical laws." Soon after the anomalous cold, other phenomena appeared. Objects in the boy's presence began to change their weight. A glass of water placed on the bedside table would stick to the surface as if it weighed several times more than normal. An hour later, the same glass could hardly be held in the hand, becoming extremely light, as if filled not with water, but with air. On June 30th, 1867, Professor Alexander Grigorievich Stoletov, a physicist at Moscow University, was invited into the ward. He conducted a series of experiments with various objects and confirmed that in the boy's presence metallic items changed their mass by 30 to 70% in either direction, without any clear pattern. He later wrote in a letter to his colleague, Professor Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev of St. Petersburg University, "I observed a phenomenon that contradicts the fundamental law of the conservation of mass. The change in mass takes place without any visible change in the volume of objects and without any chemical reactions. This challenges all our understanding of matter." After receiving the letter, Mendeleev immediately left for Moscow. By the time he arrived on July 4th, Ivan's condition had been complicated by new strange symptoms. The boy began predicting events that would happen in the next few hours. On the morning of July 4th, Ivan said, "At 14:30, a man in a military uniform will come here." Indeed, at the specified time, Colonel Alexei Petrovich Narishkin of the Semenovsky Regiment, cousin of the hospital's chief physician, arrived at the hospital on business. On July 5th, 1867, the boy said something that shocked everyone present. "Tomorrow, a house on Malaya Brunaya Street will catch fire exactly at noon." The prediction came true with terrifying accuracy. The fire began at 12:05. Professor Mendeleev, after spending several days next to the boy, concluded that Ivan's predictions were probabilistic in nature and concerned only events within a radius of no more than 3 versts from the hospital. "The boy does not predict the future in the full sense of the word," the scientist wrote in his diary. Rather, he somehow processes information about the current state of the environment and makes conclusions unavailable to the ordinary human mind. This resembles the ability of some animals to anticipate natural disasters, but in a much more developed form. By the middle of July 1867, rumors about the extraordinary boy spread across Moscow. Despite the medical staff's attempts to keep information secret, crowds of curious people began to flock to the hospital. Among the visitors were not only ordinary townsfolk, but members of the highest society, including titled nobles. Prince Dmitry Alexeyevich Golitsyn wrote in his memoirs, "The boy looked entirely ordinary, pale, with dark hair and large gray eyes. Nothing in his appearance gave away those unusual abilities everyone in the city was talking about. Yet as soon as I entered the ward, I felt an unexplainable chill that pierced to the bone, despite the hot July day. Even stranger, without raising his eyes from the book he was holding, the boy said, 'Your wife is buying gloves on Kuznetsky Most right now.'" This was absolutely true. On July 17th, an incident alarmed the doctors. At 3 a.m., the boy suddenly sat up in bed and began speaking in a voice that, according to the duty nurse, sounded nothing like a child's. In a low, hoarse tone, he delivered a long monologue in a language later identified as Ancient Greek. Nurse recorded the speech phonetically. When the next day the transcript was shown to Professor Fyodor Ivanovich Buslev, a philologist at Moscow University, he was astonished. According to him, the boy had spoken in a Thessalian dialect of Greek from the 5th century BCE, known only to a handful of specialists. The text is a fragment of an unknown philosophical treatise about the nature of time. Buslev concluded, "The author reflects on time as a substance that can be folded and unfolded like a scroll of parchment. This is a very unusual concept, not corresponding to the classical Greek ideas of time." On July 20th, 1867, psychiatrist Sergei Sergeyevich Korsakov joined the investigation. After several sessions with the boy, he concluded that Ivan was in a special state of consciousness that allowed him to perceive information unavailable to the ordinary senses. The boy shows no signs of mental illness. Korsakov wrote, "His intellect corresponds to his age. His emotional reactions are adequate, but periodically he enters a trance, during which he apparently receives access to a source of information, the nature of which I cannot determine." At the end of July, anomalous phenomena around Ivan reached their peak. On July 26th, during a visit by Professor Mendeleev, all metallic objects in the ward suddenly rose into the air and hung about half a meter above the floor. This lasted for about 3 minutes. Then the objects slowly lowered back to their places. Mendeleev, a rational and skeptical man, first suspected trickery, but a thorough examination of the room revealed no mechanisms that could cause such an effect. "I was forced to admit that I witnessed a phenomenon that cannot be explained within the framework of the known laws of physics," he later wrote. "Objects levitated without any visible support and without the application of any known forces. This contradicts the law of universal gravitation and forces us to think about physical laws not yet discovered." On July 28, 1867, an event took place that finally convinced the doctors of the supernatural nature of Ivan Petrov's case. In the presence of several witnesses, including Dr. Sokolov and Professor Stoltov. The boy began to glow. At first, a faint bluish halo appeared around his head. Then it spread over his whole body. The glow was bright enough to illuminate the ward at dusk, but not blinding. A spectral analysis of the glow was impossible with the instruments we had, noted Professor but I can confidently assert that it had a continuous spectrum, unlike any known source of light. The boy's body temperature remained normal, which rules out combustion or other exothermic reactions. That same evening, Ivan fell into a deep sleep and did not awaken for 36 hours. When he finally woke up on the morning of July 30th, his condition had radically changed. All anomalous phenomena ceased. The temperature in the room returned to normal. Objects no longer changed weight or levitated. The boy spoke Russian again and seemed not to remember anything from the previous weeks. Medical examinations showed no abnormalities. Neurological tests by Dr. Korsakov confirmed normal mental function. The only change was a small hexagonal birthmark on the back of Ivan's head, which, according to his parents, had not been there before. On August 3, 1867, Ivan Petrov was discharged. Dr. Sokolov's final report read, "Diagnosis remains undetermined. The observed symptoms and phenomena correspond to no known disease. Further observation with periodic examinations is recommended." But Ivan's fate remained a mystery. Parish records of the Church of St. Nicholas in Kamovniki state that the Petrov family left Moscow in September 1867 in St. Petersburg. Documents showed Nikolai Petrov was promoted and transferred to the central administration of the Ministry of State Domains, but nothing is known of Ivan himself. No records of him were found in school or university archives of the capital. It was as if he disappeared from official documents after the move. In his memoirs, published in 1901, Professor Stoltov casually mentioned that the boy from Kamovniki was later placed under special observation by order of high-ranking persons. He gave no details. In the archives of the third section of His Imperial Majesty's own Chancellery, researchers found a document dated October 1867. It ordered the creation of a special commission to study the unusual abilities of a certain IP. The name was but the initials and timeframes strongly suggest Ivan Petrov. Later, traces of the boy are lost in the labyrinth of history. However, in the archives of the Imperial Academy of Sciences, a document dated 1885 has survived. A report on the activity of a special commission for the study of anomalous phenomena. It mentions Subject I, who had been under observation for 18 years. Unfortunately, most of the report was destroyed in an archive fire in 1912. It is interesting that Professor Alexander Stoltov later became a pioneer in the study of the photoelectric effect and electromagnetic phenomena. In his scientific works, he repeatedly stressed that the nature of electricity and magnetism may be far more complex than we assume. Some historians believe that observing the unusual phenomena around Ivan Petrov pushed him to revolutionary research in electromagnetism. Another participant, Professor Mendeleev, sometimes referred in private correspondence to the Moscow case as an example of phenomena that make one doubt the completeness of our knowledge of physical laws. But in his official works, he never mentioned the case. Another document has survived in the archives of the Moscow Provincial Hospital, a letter from Dr. Sokolov to a colleague, dated 1872. In it, he wrote, "I recall more and more often that extraordinary case I witnessed 5 years ago. The more I think about it, the more convinced I am that we encountered a phenomenon beyond our understanding. Sometimes I think that perhaps similar abilities lie hidden in every person, but only in a few do they manifest fully. If so, then science has horizons ahead of it that we never dared to dream of." In 1897, exactly 30 years after the mysterious events in the hospital, a small journal, Bulletin of Experimental Physics and Medicine, published an anonymous article titled On Psychophysical Anomalies in Children. The article described Ivan Petrov's case in detail, including facts unknown to the public. The author was either a direct participant or had access to secret archives. The article concluded, "The case of IP is not unique. Over the last 30 years, I have collected information about 12 similar cases in different parts of the Russian Empire. In all cases, the subjects were children aged 7 to 9 who suddenly manifested unusual abilities, from telekinesis to clairvoyance. These abilities always disappeared as suddenly as they appeared, and never returned in adulthood. The only common physical sign was the appearance of a birthmark in the form of a regular geometric pattern, most often a hexagon or a 5-pointed star. Scholars believe the author was Sergei by then a leading psychiatrist. In his final years, he showed great interest in paranormal phenomena, though cautiously. The last paragraph sounded like a warning. I am convinced these cases are only the first harbingers of a phenomenon whose scale we cannot yet assess. If my theory is correct, then in the coming decades the frequency of such cases will grow geometrically. By 1900 we may face dozens, if not hundreds, of children with supernatural abilities. Is humanity ready for such a prospect? Is science prepared to explain what now lies beyond its understanding of the possible? The story of Ivan Petrov might have remained just a curious episode in Russian medical history, if not for one fact. In 1915, during the First World War, a secret unit was created under the General Staff of the Imperial Russian Army, officially designated as a special department, for the study of non-conventional methods of affecting the enemy. Its commander was appointed Major General Ivan Petrov, man whose name and patronymic matched those of the boy from Kamovniki. The archives of this unit were almost entirely destroyed during the revolutionary upheavals of 1917. A few surviving documents mention experiments with bioenergetic influence at a distance and modifications of gravitational field that strongly resembled those observed around Ita Road. Ivan Petrov, nearly 50 years earlier, was General Major Petrov, the same boy from Komovnik. If so, why did his supernatural abilities, which had disappeared in childhood, return in adulthood? And what experiments did the special unit conduct in the last years of the Russian Empire? These questions remain unanswered. It is known only that after the revolution, the traces of General Major Petrov were lost. According to one version, he was killed during the Civil War. Another claims he emigrated and continued his research abroad. A third, most fantastic, version suggests that Petrov and his colleagues achieved such success in their experiments that they managed to step completely beyond ordinary human perception and exist in some other form or dimension. In the archives of Soviet security services, several documents survive, testifying that during the 1920s, attempts were made to locate materials connected to the activities of General Petrov's special unit. Of particular interest was a mysterious device allegedly created in the laboratory of the unit shortly before the revolution. This device supposedly could amplify the bioenergetic potential of its operator thousands of times. In one report sent to the leadership of the OGPU in 1928, it was stated, according to reliable sources, in the émigré circles of Prague there exists a group of former employees of General Petrov's special unit. This group continues experiments begun back in Tsarist Russia. According to unverified data, they achieved significant success in the field of remote influence on physical objects and living organisms. It is necessary to establish surveillance over this group and, if possible, obtain information on the results of their research. The subsequent fate of this émigré group remains unknown. No records survive in the Czechoslovak police archives about incidents linked to Russian scientists. However, in 1932, the Prague newspaper, Narodny Listy, published a short note about a strange incident in the Vinohrady district. Yesterday evening, residents of several houses on Korony Street witnessed an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. Above one of the buildings, a glowing bluish cloud appeared, which remained motionless for about 20 minutes, despite strong wind. Then the cloud suddenly shrank to the size of a football and vanished with a flash resembling lightning. Meteorologists cannot explain the nature of this phenomenon. Remarkably, this was the same area where, according to Soviet intelligence, several former employees of Petrov's unit lived. The next trace of this mysterious story appears already in the Soviet Union. In 1935, under the Academy of Sciences of the USSR, a secret laboratory Bioenergetics 1 was created, headed by Professor Vladimir Mikhailovich Beck, nephew of the famous neuropathologist and psychiatrist of the same name. Documents connected to the creation of the laboratory mention that one of its tasks was to study and further develop methods devised by Ivan Petrov's group before the revolution. The activity of Bioenergetics 1 was strictly classified. However, from the memoirs of one of its employees, published in the 1990s, it is known that experiments were carried out on remote influence over physical objects by thought, and on altering gravitational and electromagnetic fields through bioenergetic action. "We worked with children who displayed unusual abilities," wrote Igor Dmitrievich Smirnov, a former employee. "Most were between 7 and 9 years old. All of them had characteristic birthmarks in the shape of regular geometric patterns, most often hexagons. Wikajetpan, the marked. Their abilities resembled those described in Ivan Petrov's telekinesis. Changes in ambient temperature, levitation of objects, foreknowledge of the near future," according to Smirnov. In the 1930s, such children were born much more frequently than in the 19th century. By his account, the laboratory monitored hundreds of such children across the Soviet Union. But there was one problem. The supernatural abilities manifested only briefly from several weeks to several months, then disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. "We tried to understand why the abilities disappeared and whether they could be preserved," recalled Smirnov. Professor Petrov developed a theory that all people have such potential, but in most it is suppressed by certain defense mechanisms of the psyche. In the mocked children, these mechanisms weakened temporarily, allowing abilities to manifest before being restored. The work of Bioenergetics 1 was cut short in 1937 when Professor Petrov and most of his staff were arrested on charges of subversive activity, and they were executed or perished in labor camps. Documents of the laboratory were confiscated by the NKVD and presumably destroyed. Yet evidence suggests the research did not end. In the KGB archives opened in the 1990s, mentions were found of Project Actant, conducted in a closed research institute in the Urals between 1941 and 1945. This project was a direct continuation of Bioenergetics 1. Its leader was physicist Dmitry Sergeyevich Lojanov, a specialist in electromagnetic fields. Before the war, he had worked in Akademician Iov's laboratory. But in 1941, he was transferred to the closed institute by personal order of Laverny. Beria. A note from Beria to Stalin dated July 1941 has survived Comrade Stalin. "I consider it necessary to intensify work on Project Actant. There is evidence that the Germans are conducting similar research. If they succeed in creating a weapon based on bioenergetic principles, the consequences may be catastrophic. Our scientists state that with proper funding, they can achieve practical results within a year." Project Actant received the highest priority and unlimited resources. Work proceeded in 3 directions. Finding and studying children with paranormal abilities, the marked remained the term. Developing a device to amplify these abilities. Exploring whether paranormal abilities could be artificially activated in ordinary people. December 1943 report described a breakthrough. Researchers linked paranormal abilities to specific regions of the brain normally inactive in ordinary people. "We discovered that in marked children, during manifestations of paranormal powers, heightened activity occurs in the parietal temporal occipital region, forming a kind of triangle. Its vertices correspond to 3 points forming an equilateral triangle. If connected by lines, the resulting geometric pattern meshes. The birthmarks observed on the children's skin." The report also described a device called a bioenergetic amplifier, designed to stimulate these brain regions and activate abilities. It used coils, high-frequency generators, and specially grown quartz crystals. Preliminary tests suggested it could temporarily reactivate abilities, even after they had faded naturally. But the effect lasted only minutes, and was followed by a severe exhaustion. In January 1944, work on Project Actant was suddenly halted. Reasons were not stated. Most scientists were transferred to the atomic bomb program. Loginov disappeared without a trace. But the story did not end. In 1957, during the Khrushchev thaw, Project Actant was revived under the new name, Molnia Lightning. It was led by astronomer Nikolai Alexandrovich Kozyrev, known for his unusual theories about time. Kozyrev, unaware of actant materials, independently developed similar ideas about the link between certain brain regions and paranormal powers. Time is not merely an abstract coordinate, but a special form of energy, he wrote. Living beings can perceive and even manipulate this energy, especially children, whose brains are more receptive. Project Melonia focused on children with paranormal abilities, now called sensitives. Again, special attention was given to geometric birthmarks. Their numbers kept growing. By the late 1950s, thousands of such children were reported across the USSR. Researchers created instruments to register bioenergetic fields around sensitives, based on Kozyrev's principles. Reports stated that sensitives generated local distortions of explaining telekinesis and levitation. The sensitive does not move objects by thought, but alters space-time properties around them, causing their displacement. A May 1959 report described an experiment with 12-year-old Sergei K. He had a hexagonal birthmark and demonstrated telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and limited clairvoyance. In a special chamber isolated from electromagnetic fields, Sergei was asked to move a 1 kg metal cube by thought. As he concentrated, detectors recorded strong space-time distortion. After 30 seconds, the cube not only moved across the table but disappeared. Instruments registered an energy surge comparable to a small nuclear blast. 3 minutes later, the cube reappeared, its temperature near absolute zero, -273 degrees Celsius. Strange symbols were etched on one face, resembling unidentifiable hieroglyphs. Researchers concluded it seems the cube temporarily shifted into another space or dimension. This is the first recorded case of interdimensional transfer of a material object induced by a sensitive. Soon after, Sergei fell into a coma and died 2 weeks later. Autopsy found no pathology, except his brain was almost completely dehydrated, as if exposed to extreme heat, though his body temperature had been normal. After this tragedy, Project Melonia was suspended. Kozyrev was removed and returned to astronomy. Documents were classified and sent to KGB archives. In the 1960s, during the Cold War, interest revived. In 1963, a new project, Storm, was launched, led by physicist Yuri Borisovich Kozyrev, a specialist in quantum mechanics. Unlike earlier projects, Storm aimed to create technical devices reproducing paranormal effects. Without children, we assume paranormal abilities are based on unknown physical principles that can be reproduced technologically. Our goal is to build a device generating space-time distortions like sensitives do, but stronger and longer lasting, wrote Kozyrev. Using superconducting magnets cooled with liquid helium and quantum amplifiers, the first prototype generator of space-time anomalies, GPA-1 was built in 1966 in a secret. Novosibirsk Labit created small distortions, allowing objects to shift a few meters for seconds, but its efficiency increased dramatically in the presence of sensitive children, suggesting biotechnical resonance. In 1968, an experiment with 5 sensitives ages 8 to 12, and GPA-1 succeeded in levitating a 10-kilogram metal cube for 3 minutes. But all 5 children suffered exhaustion. 2 developed paralysis. 1 died from a cerebral hemorrhage. This tragedy posed Storm. Kozyrev was replaced by Viktor Ivanovich Mikhailov. Between 1969 and 1972, MODIFIEDP devices were built. GPA-5 could create stable spacetime distortions within a 50 m radius, moving objects up to 100 kilograms, but it required enormous energy and lasted only 10 minutes. To overcome limits, researchers trained adult operators with latent paranormal potential. By 1975, 20 military men were trained. With GPA-5, they could influence objects up to 1 kilometer away, alter temperature, and disrupt electronics, but their health declined. Headaches, insomnia, mental disorders. 3 died of brain neurysms. In 1977, Storm was reorganized into Gorisand Horizon, led by neurophysiologist Igor Sergeevich. Focus shifted to training people to control powers safely. The human brain remains the most effective generator of space-time anomalies. Our task is to use its potential without harming health, wrote Kondrachev. They developed meditation practices, bioenergetic exercises, and a SMORE bioenergetic resonator device. By 1980, operators could perform remote perception, psychokinesis, limited telepathy. The results were unreliable and energy-costly. By the mid-1980s, funding waned. Projects seemed unpromising. But in 1986, in the town of Pereval, Voroshilovrad Oblast, na Luhansk, Ukraine, an 8-year-old boy, Alexis, became the center of events, eerily resembling Ivan Petrov's case. Moving objects, temperature changes, strange lights. He too had a hexagonal birthmark. Local doctors were baffled. A secret team from Moscow arrived, studied the boy for 2 weeks, then took him and his parents away. Officially, they moved to a closed science town near Novosibirsk. Neighbors recalled the parents looked depressed, the boy frightened. Partially declassified. KGB files mention the creation in 1986 of Group Phoenix to study renewed child phenomena, led by physiologist Valery Dmitrievich Saporozhit. A veteran of Horizon. Phoenix discovered a disturbing pattern. Starting in 1985, children with geometric birthmarks appeared across the USSR in exponentially growing numbers. Dozens in 1985, thousands by 1990. We are witnessing a wave of mutations, wrote Zap. Not only external marks, but brain structures are affected. These children show abnormal development of the parietal temporal occipital cortex, enabling paranormal abilities at younger ages. And these abilities no longer fade quickly, but persist and grow. One case, 6-year-old Marina K. of say cooled mob 50 kg objects and ignite paper by thought, with precise control and no exhaustion. This is a qualitatively new generation of sensitives, wrote Zap. Their powers are stable, controllable, and lack harmful side effects. This opens new prospects but also raises grave concerns. If such children keep increasing, social consequences may be unpredictable. Then came the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Funding ended. Phoenix disbanded. Scientists scattered. Documents were partly destroyed, partly transferred to new Russian security services. It seemed the story that began with Ivan Petrov in 1867 had finally ended. In the early 1990s, the collapse of the USSR and the ensuing political and economic chaos effectively ended the work of Group Phoenix. Funding stopped. Most scientists moved to the private sector or emigrated, and documents were either destroyed or transferred to the archives of the newly formed Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, Itwold-Abe. Seemed that the story had ended. But in the early 2000s, rumors circulated in closed scientific circles about the revival of research into paranormal phenomena. According to unverified information, a new secret laboratory named Vector P was established in Russia, focusing on children with unusual abilities. In 2000, Russian journalist Dmitry Sokolov attempted his own investigation. He discovered that between 1995 and 2000, hundreds of strange incidents involving children had been reported across Russia. Spontaneous movement of objects, sudden temperature shifts, mysterious fires, visions of the future. Almost invariably, these cases quickly attracted the attention of unidentified officials. Afterward, the children and their families either moved away under unexplained circumstances or simply disappeared. Sokolov published a series of articles under the title Children of the Future, suggesting that Russia was running a secret program to gather and study children with paranormal powers. Shortly after the last article, he died in a car accident under mysterious circumstances. Also in 2000, an anonymous document appeared on the internet titled Project Awakening. Results and prospects, written in the style of a scientific report. It claimed that a research program had been active in Russia since 1993. To date, we have identified and gathered more than 300 children with pronounced paranormal abilities, it said. All of them have characteristic geometric birthmarks and abnormal development of specific brain areas. Our studies show that these children represent a new evolutionary step, Homo evolution, or the new human, with abilities traditionally considered supernatural. The document also claimed that researchers had developed methods to artificially activate dormant abilities in ordinary children through a combination of psychotropic drugs, electromagnetic stimulation of the brain, and psychological training. The method shows effectiveness in 60% of cases. Children who undergo full activation develop various abilities, though weaker than natural sensitives. Still, even these artificially induced powers hold immense practical value. The authenticity of the document cannot be verified. Many scholars dismiss it as a hoax, inspired by Sakala Visa publications. Yet some details matched information found only in newly opened secret archives. Around the same time, a young programmer from St. Petersburg, Igor Levin, launched a website called Project Legacy, dedicated to gathering testimonies from people with childhood paranormal experiences. Levin himself claimed to have had such abilities, which faded with age. The site hosted a forum where users anonymously shared stories. Within a year, more than 500 posts appeared, describing telekinesis, clairvoyance, telepathy, and other phenomena. Many mentioned unusual birthmarks, often on the back of the head or behind the ear. "I don't know if it was imagination or real abilities," wrote one user, "but at 8 or 9, I could move small objects without touching them. It lasted 3 months, then stopped suddenly. My parents thought it was tricks, but I know it was real." One striking story came from a woman identifying herself as Elena K. She claimed that in 1987, at AG 9, she was selected for a special educational project because of her abilities. There were about 20 of us. They kept us in a closed facility near Moscow, training us to control our powers moving objects, reading emotions, predicting events. The instructors called themselves men. Some of them also had abilities. Tagwika, they told us we were special, the bridge to the future of humanity. Alina said the project lasted 2 years before abruptly ending with the collapse of the USSR. The children were returned to their families, and their powers began to fade. Only her strong emotional empathy remained. Her story sparked heated debate on the forum. Some accused her of lying. Others said they had heard of similar secret schools. Soon after, Elena disappeared from the forum. Not long afterward, Project Legacy itself went offline. The domain was not renewed. Levin vanished. His phone disconnected. His email dead. Rumors claimed he had emigrated to the US, or else suffered a breakdown and was institutionalized. In 2010, the subject resurfaced in official science. In the bulletin of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor Nikolai Petrovich Savaliev, Doctor of Medicine, published an article on the neurophysiological basis of so-called paranormal phenomena. Savaliev argued that paranormal abilities result from rare neural anomalies, enabling the brain to process information unavailable to normal senses. He hypothesized about quantum structures within neurons that could interact with environmental quantum fields. These quantum structures are usually inactive in most people, he wrote, but in some children, particularly between the ages of 7 and 9, they may temporarily activate, leading to unusual abilities. With age, this activity declines, explaining why powers disappear in adults. The article provoked controversy. Many denounced it as pseudoscience. Yet privately, some researchers admitted Savaliev's ideas merited study. Months later, Savaliev was appointed director of a newly created Institute of Neurocognitive Research under the Academy of Sciences. The institute received heavy state funding and support from private foundations linked to high-ranking officials. Publicly, it focused on cognition and neurology. But former staff later revealed that secret departments specifically studied anomalous, psychophysical phenomena. In 2015, Russian scientist Alexander Voronov, once employed at the institute, emigrated to Canada. In an interview with a popular science journal, New Horizon, he made sensational claims. There is indeed a secret Russian program continuing the Soviet projects Horizon and Phoenix, he said. Inside the institute, a department works with children possessing unusual abilities. They are selected nationwide based on physical markers, geometric birthmarks, brain structures visible on MRI. According to Voronov, the number of such children had sharply risen from a few hundred in the early 2000s by 2015. Are witnessing an evolutionary leap, he argued. A new type of human is emerging, with abilities once thought impossible. This is happening not only in Russia, but worldwide. We just track it more systematically. Voronov claimed the institute made progress in understanding the mechanisms. Quantum processes and neurons allowed consciousness to interact directly with physical reality. These children are not breaking physics. They are using aspects of it we barely comprehend. Quantum mechanics already admits the observer shapes outcomes. These children can consciously influence probabilistic wave functions, leading to macroscopic effects like telekinesis or foresight. The institute officially denied his claims, calling him an unfit former employee. Western scientists greeted his words with skepticism. Still, reports of children with abilities increased worldwide. Videos online most fake, but some convincing added to the debate. In 2020, independent researchers launched Project Human, a global effort to collect and analyze reports of unusual child phenomena. Led by neurobiologist David Chun, it created an anonymous platform where parents could submit cases, plus a remote testing protocol. In our first year, we received over 3,000 reports from 64 countries, Chun said. After filtering out obvious hoaxes and natural explanations, we had about 400 serious cases. Remote testing confirmed unusual abilities in 30 of them far above chance. Most children were 6 to 10 years old, many with geometric birthmarks. Psychological traits included high intelligence, vivid imagination, and heightened emotional sensitivity. We don't rush to declare supernatural powers, Chuna emphasized. Our goal is to gather data and understand. Perhaps these children simply perceive more acutely, or perhaps we are indeed witnessing new aspects of consciousness and reality. Parents often feared stigma or unwanted official attention. Funding was scarce, since traditional science was reluctant to support such research. Still, Project Human grew steadily. We may be on the threshold of a new era in understanding the mind, Chun concluded. History shows that phenomena once deemed supernatural later found scientific explanation. Perhaps paranormal abilities are not violations of natural law, but glimpses of parts of reality we have not yet explored. And what became of Ivan Petrov, the boy from Komovniki, with whom the story began? His fate is still shrouded in mystery. The last credible reference is from 1895, in documents of St. Petersburg University mentioning a Professor Ivan Petrov lecturing on experimental psychophysics. No proof connects him to Ivan. A legend claims Ivan lived to old age and died in 1952 at Noventite Trace. Before his death, he allegedly passed secret papers to a disciple, containing theories on paranormal powers and predictions of a new generation of gifted children emerging in the late 20th century. The legend is unverified, but in 2018, a second-hand bookshop in St. Petersburg uncovered a handwritten manuscript dated 1949, signed with the initials IP, titled On the Nature of Time and Consciousness. It proposed a radical theory. Consciousness can directly interact with the space-time continuum at the quantum level. Time is not linear flow, but a complex, multidimensional structure. Consciousness not only perceives time, but actively shapes and alters it. What we call paranormal powers are manifestations of this interaction.